So, okay, so we have a lot to discuss, and
Okay,
I really
yeah,
want to focus on your most recent project, Armed with Only a Camera: The Life and Death of Brent Renaud. I
yep.
know on October 21st, the film that you produce is going to be airing on HBO, and it was first debuted on South by Southwest and has been receiving lots of praise and recognition since.
Yes.
So, and you just finished the whole week of screenings with your
Correct.
Q&As.
Yes. So we did a
Yeah.
theatrical release here in New York, and that went really well. We had the idea was not so not only is a tribute to Brent, but it's also a tribute to the fallen journalist. And what we had done is are trying to partner up, and we have partnered with CPJ. Also, Gene Foley Foundation was there for one panel. We had the Neiman Foundation also a company there. So we had 7 nights and 7 panels discussions, and so it was exhausting, but I think it's good. It was well received, and I think people found the conversations to be engaging, especially
Mhm.
pertaining to what's happening to journalists at this time. So,
Absolutely.
mm.
No, like you said, to say the least, you've been busy. And well, one of the first questions I wanted to ask you about this whole project, if we can kind of go in chronological order, is how were you approached to get involved with this documentary?
So, okay, I mean, the moment, so to go back, we were, Brent and I mean, Brent and Craig have been working for over 25 years, most of their life, working together as brothers. I met Brent at the Neiman Foundation in 2018, 2019, and in 2020, we started working together in documentaries. I'm primarily a photojournalist and always been wanting to explore other forms of storytelling. And they gave me this opportunity. We were working on a project about refugees around the world, sort of like what was the status of refugees, and we had to sort of pick 4 places to go and film and visit. But that was around February when the invasion of Russia to Ukraine started. And we quickly saw that that was more relevant. It was immediate, and it was displacement, refugees. The numbers were swelling fairly fast. So by the second week, we were there entering Ukraine, and our journey took us to Kiev. We went outside Kiev to Irpin. We were trying to get to Bucha, and that's when we were attacked. Unfortunately, my friend Brent lost his life. I was injured. But the moment that that happened, Craig flew in to get his brother's body out and to help me be evacuated. And he started filming his trip arriving to Kiev. So from that moment on, I think we were conscious that we wanted to document this. We weren't sure if we were going to make a documentary about it, but I think it's sort of that innate reaction to document what's happening. I quickly realized that now I was on the other side of the story that I was telling. And I also sort of recorded myself, recorded some voice notes, some videos. And then maybe a couple of months after that, it's when Craig pitched this to HBO and said, "Look, I think we have a documentary. I want to honor my brother." And the Renault brothers had a long-standing relationship with HBO. They have produced 6 documentaries for them. So they said yes, just work on it and just keep us up to date on your development. And so I went a year later after our attack, and I met with the driver who was taking us that day. I did the same route that Brennan and I did when we traveled at that time, well, a year before, and that didn't make it into the documentary. And we just kept working on it. I from the beginning I was part of it, not only as a subject but also to help Craig in filming and photographing and editing and producing it. So that's how I got involved, and we finished last December, and it debuted in South by Southwest.
This sounds like a really, just not to state the obvious, but a very personal project because, you were there and it's like you said, you're on the other side of the story. I guess, especially with our organization, since we are a group of foreign journalists, how did that impact you?
I mean, deeply in many ways. I've covered conflicts in other parts, mainly in Latin America,
Mm,
never to the scale of what I saw in Ukraine. Brent had done that, have been documenting conflicts for many years in Iraq and Somalia, Afghanistan, Mexico, even here. I mean, if you think of conflicts that we always think of wars, but there's other sort of conflicts that happen, and so it affected me one because I was injured and I had to go through 13 surgeries to recover. There was at one point that my leg was not responding and I thought I wasn't going to be able to walk. It took months of physical therapy to be able to walk again. And then also it's the emotional toll of losing your wingman, you losing your partner, your friend of work, my colleague, who at the same time was my mentor. And so that has been, so there's the two components. There's the physical part, which, luckily now I am healthy and fully recovered. But then there's the emotional and personal part that affects us who do this sort of work. I feel that I bonded very closely to Craig. I always said I lost a friend, but I gained a brother in Craig. And so that has brought us together, has brought me together to his family. And we are supporting each other throughout this process. There are ups and downs. Trauma can express itself in many ways. It's a wound that heals very slowly, and that there are times that it will reopen. So you just have to be mindful of that. So that's, I feel like, in a broad stroke, like the two things that you deal with something like this, with a tragedy like this.
absolutely. No, I mean, I'm just fortunate, really in this, but it's like you said, over time, a lot of our colleagues have definitely, unfortunately, either gotten hurt or worse, like in this
And
situation.
yeah, and we're fortunate that we can leave. When I went back the second time to Ukraine, you could see our colleagues, who have been there since the beginning, nonstop documenting, and the toll of that takes on people's lives, mental health. It's severe, and it's hard to sometimes cope with it. And so I feel lucky that I could, remove myself from it. I still struggle with some of that trauma, but I can't imagine what my colleagues and even the citizens there in Ukraine are still enduring after 3.5 years of war.
Absolutely. And ongoing, right? Because we're about to approach
Ongoing,
the
yeah,
fourth year.
absolutely, yeah.
hmm So I guess, I mean, there's so many challenges that I can imagine that came up during this process of these last few years, but what was a challenge that surprised you in this documentary process?
I think the one that always stands out is, I mean, Brent was a very private person and we were very close friends, but there were aspects of his life that I didn't really know because, he just didn't want to share, and so it was almost like like discovering parts of my friend that I didn't know about. We went through everything. We went through the archives of 20 something years of the Two Brothers archives. We were trying to find his voice. So, as we often do, we never turn the camera on ourselves. We just go and it's about the story and our collaborators and how we can best tell the story. So that was one of the challenges, finding his voice. So going back through all those archives and how the film for me was very revealing of the way they work and the way he worked. Also, he kept very detailed and copious diaries, and I Craig had bestowed on me that responsibility of going over them, and there were moments that I felt that I was invading my friend's privacy. So I would go to Craig and say, I don't feel comfortable with this. But the family always encouraged me and said, there's anyone we trust with this information, it's you. So there were moments that I would read and I said, I don't need to know that. But that helped us piece together also the documentary. Um, so in that process, I think I learned more about Brent. I also, like I said, I spent months living with Craig to help him with the edit. So that also brought us together in many ways. We would go out, either he would go running, I would go biking. We would try to diffuse sometimes the tension and the difficulties of seeing Brandon. One scene he's alive, he's going about filming, then the other scene he's dead. And so you just, that took also an emotional toll that I think we were both mindful of that and always kept checking with each other and see how both were doing.
Yeah, I think it's in a interesting way, and as traumatic as it is, it's kind of a great privilege and honor that you got to work with someone so on the same level as you approaching this, which is rare because I'm sure you've been doing this job a very long time, and that's not always the case.
It is not, no. And to me, that's sort of like the gift. I told his brother, and as brothers, they had arguments, it had fallouts, it had
Sure.
um and part of the film also which we felt comfortable revealing is that Brent was diagnosed with autism late in his life. So um this we use sort of a sounding, which is sort of like a speech, a presentation that we gave when we were fellows, and that was also sort of the blueprint to help us structure the documentary. But in that, he reveals that, and so um, that part of Brent, for some reason, I got along very well. He could come across as very intense and demanding, but I'm very demanding with myself and the work that I do. So, like you said, I think we just sort of had this perfect match. And I always told Craig, I'm lucky because the honeymoon wasn't over with me and Brent. We never had a fallout. We never had an argument. We saw eye to eye. He respected my work and my vision. I respected obviously theirs. And so it was a relationship of mutual respect and trust. And that's rare sometimes in this industry. And he gave me plenty of opportunities to grow as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. And so that's where yeah, I feel privileged to being able to work, and especially work with your friend, which is very rare these days, that you can actually go and hang out with a friend and do work and enjoy what both are doing and have a vision and work hard to get it done well. So it's rare, those opportunities, but when you have them, it's precious.
Absolutely. And since I definitely want to think a lot of good moments, I mean, I would hope a lot of people want to think of good moments as
Yeah.
well. What is your happiest memory with Brent?
I have so many, especially when we were fellows. When we started our fellowship, we at the beginning he would miss a lot of the activities that are put in place as a daily activities that we have to do as fellows. It's
Mm,
a very tight schedule. It's a very not demanding, but there's a lot to be offered. And this one year where you can get to spend and study and do research and meet other peers and other colleagues, he would miss those. Sometimes he would miss those activities, and in my mind, I thought, wow, what an ungrateful person this is, not to to be given this opportunity and miss all of this. And then one day, I remember he called me. He said, "Hey, Juan, I lost my keys. I'm locked out of the house. Can I come and stay over your house?" I said, "Sure." And that's when I realized that Brian was just, his mind was somewhere else. He was busy thinking in other things, these other sort of mundane things where he was socially, he was trying to participate, but at the same time trying to catch up with what the demands of the fellowship. And I remember that he didn't have a place to sleep. He was sleeping in a sleeping bag. So I remember helping him find furniture, little things like that that always made me laugh. And we grew up a very close relationship. I understood that I was sort of this bridge between sometimes him just having a hard time integrating socially, and I will pull him into these situations. But then he just, you could also see him grow as a person and take chances. He did stand-up comedy while he was up in Cambridge. And he was just a funny person, but it was an acquired taste. So I remember details like that. I remember one time we were doing a story in Venezuela on the border, and we're trying to do this 360 video of people crossing the bridge illegally into Colombia and out of Venezuela. And there was a group of contraband group that were trying to steal our cameras, and so we had to wrestle with them. recover her cameras, and then run away because they were going to pull guns on us. So I don't know. At the end, you just sit at a coffee and laugh of all the stuff that happened. So that's how I want to remember him. And there are parts of that documentary that to this day I don't watch anymore because I feel it triggers some of it brings me back to that moment when we were attacked. And so I'm okay with being seen and that people see what it's like to be in the middle of a conflict, and the toll that that can have on journalists. But I choose not to watch at least the first 5 or 7 minutes of the documentary because it's very strong images.
Absolutely. No, I can't even imagine because like you said, I'm so used to being behind the camera or behind the microphone,
Yeah, yeah,
where I can't imagine that kind of focus on not just myself, but the involvement. And you kind of brought up an interesting part about audiences that I want to dive in a little deeper. And this is an interesting film because your general audience has a curiosity, right? Because you're exposing them to a world that is not common, but also you're making it, at least it feels like from the clips that I've seen and from this discussion, it's very relatable to journalists in this field. And in the sense of like those special moments that journalists know, like struggling, where are you going to sleep? How did we get here? A problem that came up that you couldn't have imagined you would
yeah.
have to deal with. And I'm curious, what do you think a foreign journalist is going to take from watching your documentary?
Well, I think I hope they appreciate the level of intimacy that the documentary exposes and shows, because basically it follows the journey of part of it is telling Brent's story, but also the journey of his brother, who has been his long life uh, partner in crime, if you call it, if you can call it that, of people who always been together, and they had this pact. Like I said this many times in panels, where they had a pact and said, whatever happens, we will never leave the other behind. And so it's him going to bring back his brother, and then seeing that memorial, the eulogies, and sort of flashback to all those moments that, like you said, it's that's the reason why we do this work. A lot of people probably don't understand that. And I can say that because I'm asked that every time we screen this film. One of the questions is, why do you keep going back? Why do you expose yourself to this? And sometimes it's hard for people to understand that. And my answer to that is, um, I feel first and foremost I'm witnessing history, and we have to be there to make sure that history is not rewritten or erased. But also, it's a calling. I feel like that is where I find myself to be useful. That is where I can really use my skills to give others voice. And I think that's what you can hopefully come out of this film is the dedication of Brent over and over many years of going back to Haiti, not only once, but many, many times back to Haiti, going to Somalia. They spent 1 year with the National Guard when they were first deployed to Iraq. And they were probably the first people who were embedded for that long, and being able to tell the story from the perspective of the soldiers, but the families back home. And so, it's just that deep dive that I think people sometimes don't appreciate the amount of effort, the time that you have to spend. I don't want to call it sacrifice, but you do have to spend a lot of time out in the field away from other things, family. Um, and so, but the product or the end result of that is hopefully you can make people aware of and tell stories about those areas where we wouldn't get information like you're right now in Ukraine. And yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing there, because if it weren't for journalists who go abroad, we wouldn't know what was happening in some of these areas. And certainly viewers don't might not know about conflicts in other parts of the world because we're so focused on very specific topics these days. So that's what I hope that they see themselves maybe reflected in that film, and also again, like I said, it's a tribute to the fallen journalists. There have been so many after Brent's death, especially
Hmm.
the last year, that because of the not only the conflict in Ukraine, but also the conflict in Gaza. So it's like that those numbers keep growing, and that's something that I I know we're not going to stop with the film, but I hope that just raises awareness of how important is the work that we do.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, the raising of awareness. I mean, there's so many issues in the world today, and they all deserve that kind of coverage. But you're right, it is a bit of a difficult thing to explain because, like you said, it's not a sacrifice because a lot of us want to do this
Yes.
work, but also it does come with, I'm saying challenges seems silly, risks to say
Yeah,
the
for
least.
sure. Yes. Yeah.
And I guess, has this changed how you approach um, other stories from your future? Or do you think it still kind of brings you back to the original reason why you do what you do?
I think to me, I mean, if anything, I've learned to appreciate life more, and I've learned to
Mm.
appreciate the work that I do more. I feel more passionate about it, especially given the times that we're living through right now here in the States and abroad. Like, um, I think that we have to continue to do our work. And so, despite of what happened and my friend dying and I'm being injured, I think for me it has been of um, of refocusing and saying this, I want to continue to do this work. Has my approach changed? I think not. I think it's still the same. I now like to take more deeper dives. I think there is value in that. Obviously, there's less and less funding for that type of journalism, but I still have editors who believe in what I do and see value in that. Um, so I'll keep going out. I'll keep going. I'll keep going and telling stories, and it's always about, I think, risk assessment. As much as we want to control everything, there's always an element of risk. We try to minimize that by having more intel about where we're going, understanding the situation, taking all the precautions. There's always that chance that things can go wrong, and unfortunately for us, that was in Ukraine. That's not to say that it will happen again, but that's not shying away from telling these stories. I wish I could go back to Ukraine. I've been itching to go back because I think I feel like I didn't finish the job I was there to do, and also I feel like in debt, not only to the country but to telling the proper story. And I think there's other colleagues who are doing amazing work there. So we just need more of us to keep going and working and bringing out these voices and telling the stories that in places that most of us would never know if it wasn't for a journalist who lives abroad, and who's taking the time to spend there and to research and hopefully pitch the story and have it published or disseminated somewhere in the abroad.
Absolutely. And actually, because with this specific article, it's going to be coming out in our October bulletin. And we have a whole new set of students who will be reading this. And I wanted to ask, what advice would you want to give our new generation of students considering reporting in conflict zones?
I would say, I mean, to them, I would say, like, really, really understand the area that you're going to. Um, I would really encourage them to practice this parachuting journalism that at first some of us are tempted to do, because we want to make a career, and some people just move abroad and or they just go in and out of places. So to really understand what they're getting into, there are now more resources available to them to safely or to do this in a safer way. When I was first starting out, there weren't anywhere those resources, so you kind of learn from your peers. Always reach out to others. I think this is a as competitive as this profession is. Everyone's very compassionate about giving a hand, advice, or helping someone who started out in this field. So I think that's that's something that maybe look for mentorship, look for others that have more experience to tell you, give you their senses. And the last thing we'll say is also consider not causing harm
Mm,
to the communities that you're going to be reporting from and with. So it's important, I think, to understand that we might be fortunate to leave, but some problems will stay behind, and we don't want to cause more problems to the people on the ground. So yeah, I think those are kind of three things I would tell students to keep in mind.
absolutely. I mean, you mentioned something like keeping in mind the country you're in or the location and the communities, because that's always my fear. Constantly in my head, like, I hope I haven't done something offensive or incorrect. But yeah, no, I think you're right exactly on that.
And give
I do.
yourself your pleasure to and give yourself sorry, and then you give yourself that opportunity to be surprised that you might have it wrong, that you might be looking at a situation from a different perspective. And so that's when it's so important to talk to the people on the ground, because they might even tell you what is the actual issue. So it's always to me it's always been this balance of talking to editors, coming in with a set mind of like, I want to report on this. But then when you hit the ground, you're like, oh, but it's actually the issue is this other issue. So allow yourself to be surprised and to be able to pivot if the story it might have a different perspective or angle.
Absolutely. I have two more questions for
Yes,
you.
of course.
Uh, this one, I know that this film uncovers a lot of different locations, and I guess what I know everyone's probably in your, especially the people you worked with, have different opinions on this, but what was your favorite part of the film?
I mean, I think there's a moment where Brent goes to Somalia, and he walks into there's a one of the largest car bombs detonates in the capital. This it's a scene of carnage, but they go back into the hospital, and there's a man who he's filming, and he passes through one of the wards and one of the beds, and then a man who's you can clearly see him. He's burned, his hands are burned, his face is burned, but calls out and says, "What's your name?" And he says, "Oh, my name is Brennan." And he says, you're holding that camera from your heart." And that moment sort of always strikes me as, um, you know, that he was able to see that in Brent and the way he
Mm,
was working, that this man felt the compassion, the what Brent was trying to do, to be there in that moment and to tell those people's stories. So that to me is always uplifting.
mm,
And I like that scene so much because it's just something that unexpected, and that to have it be in film. So we're lucky that Brendan stopped rolling. He just kept the camera going. So that was probably one of the challenges of this film, is finding those little nuggets, those moments of
mm.
humanity and compassion that Brent had and what he was filming.
I mean, I'm so glad you said that because I wish you could see my notes at the top of the list. I wrote that quote, the way you're holding that camera, you're doing it from your heart. And that was the best part of the trailer.
Yeah,
Like that line was,
I love
it got me at least.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that sometimes because we are so focused on others, but the way that sometimes we're perceived, and I think that's also something very important, is the way we compose ourselves, the way we enter some of these scenes and enter people's lives, and depending how we are, people can see through that. And oftentimes I tell my students that is, be humble, but also just have this compassion with people, and people surprise you, and so that scene is one that it always surprises me every time I watch it.
Yeah, I think it's exactly as you said because I don't think we think people are looking at us. And
And
apparently they are.
and especially the ones us that use cameras, we tend to hide behind the camera, right? Because if we
Mm,
find it as a mechanism to maybe distance ourselves from the violence, from the moment, but they can still see it through us, and can see our intentions, and so the fact that that man saw that in Brent, it's one of those things that stick to my mind. Yeah.
absolutely. All right, this question, uh, I try to ask this to everyone I interview, but we'll see how it goes. I know you just had a long week of Q&As and screenings, and so what I'm curious about is Is there a question you haven't been asked that you wish you were asked?
Oh wow. Um, I mean, I think you asked me that already, which was what was the favorite, what were the most happiest moments with Brent? Because I think sometimes people, the film is heavy, it's difficult to watch, it's emotionally charged, has graphic content. So to me, I people might take away and walk out of the theater or after watching the film and maybe have that image of Brent. And so I appreciate when, very few, including you, have asked me how I remember him, because that's not the Brent I want to remember. I want to remember the happy moment. So I think that that question doesn't come up very often. Maybe because the time, maybe because of the panels are short, or because people are so I don't want to say shocked, but you can tell in their faces they just watch something that is difficult to watch. And when you start the panels, there's a quiet moment, and it's hard to break that moment. But so that's I think something. Um, and then the other now I'm thinking the other question that no one has asked, not me, but Craig, is how is it, what it's like to work with your brother. I don't have brothers. I don't have siblings.
Hmm.
So I've always been sort of like this one man band. And so I don't know what that relationship is to be able to work with your brother for such a long time in very difficult situations. I haven't seen, haven't heard anyone ask that question. And I'm curious because I might know the answer, but putting him on the spot would be something that I want to know. Like what is it? Because I know what it's like to work with a close friend, but not with a brother or a sibling. So
Absolutely. And especially in this field, like you mentioned earlier, it's very competitive and you have to be, I don't want to say be careful of journalists, but there is a bit of caution,
yeah, there's a bit of
depending on who
that.
you're working with. And and so to take it to another level where it's a family member like that, because I do have siblings and I also part of me funny enough, my sister is an actual photographer and my brother is a firefighter. And to see like it's amazing to see them work, but also to consider working with them, it's a whole other problem because my brother just gets annoyed when I'm like
Yeah,
somewhere where I am right now
yeah, exactly.
for
And so that's what
understandable
I think
reasons.
is like, how do these guys that, and I know they had ups and downs, but that's like, how do they stay true to what their work that they were doing, but also respecting that line that they're brothers, but they're colleagues. I don't know. So and there's so many, there are few
Mm.
filmmakers that are brothers, right? Or even in journalism, I have never come across a writer and a photographer or something like that. Maybe as a couple, maybe if they're married, but
Sure.
siblings, I don't know. So that's I'm always been curious about that, and I know that he has not, at least where I've been, he hasn't been asked that question.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That would be definitely a question to ask him.